Pupetta Maresca, an astrological portrait by Ciro Discepolo, straight black and short hair, a fiery and penetrating gaze, a shaded face, a leopard print-like fabric scarf knotted around her neck, hands on her hips. It is February 13th, 1982, and Pupetta Maresca, a legendary figure who embodies a lifetime of bitterness and misfortune, has called a hasty press conference at the Press Club of Naples. To the journalists who were expecting sensational revelations about cigarette smuggling or her son who disappeared and was never found, the current female pole position of the Campagna Camorra delivers, with flames in her eyes, a warning for Raffaele Cutolo. He must leave me and mine alone, and he should know that if he doesn't, I will be capable of exterminating his entire family, including the children in the cradle. Don Rafael, for his part, lets it be known that he has nothing to say to that woman, Cella Femena. And so the episode closes, incredibly, without any official complaint from the judiciary for death threats. But it is not the first time, and it will not be the last, that this incredible character, who seems to have been born from the tragic pen of Salvatore di Giacomo, leaves everyone speechless. It is no coincidence that her second dominant is Uranus, angular to the ascendant. She was born in Castellamare di Stabia near Naples on January 19th, 1935, at 11 a.m. Uranus on the ascendant is a sign of great existential instability, and it always ends up coloring, with many plot twists, the destinies of those who host this position in their birth chart. The story of Assunta Maresca, Pupetta or Pupetella means little doll, a particularly graceful child, begins when the girl was 16 and won a local Miss contest. She was of a wild, typically southern beauty, made especially of dark shades, eyes, hair, skin. It was thus that a man lost his head for her. It was Pasquale Simonetti, already known as Pascalone Ienola, a mountain physically and in terms of Camorra power. His recklessness even led him to slap Lucky Luciano at the Agnano racetrack. The year was 1955, a tragic year in the biography of Pupetta Maresca, which, with the transit of Uranus over the natal moon and Pluto in the fourth house opposite the sun and square to natal Uranus, kicked off her extremely eventful destiny, which, as we will see now, has been marked in its most important stages precisely by the transits of Uranus. Therefore, the feuilleton relating to this transit predicted first prize in the beauty pageant, marriage, a pregnancy, the murder of her husband by rival Camorristi, and the revenge of our subject, who in turn killed the presumed assassin of her consort. Then the trial and imprisonment. All this happened between the spring and autumn of 1955. The subsequent study of the transit of Uranus in that period, on the subject's chart, should be for the benefit of those who still believe that Uranus is just a rock orbiting above our heads. The child was born in Poggioreale prison and was named Pasqualino. The subsequent stages always feature Uranus as the protagonist. 1965, Pupetta leaves prison while the star is sesqui-square to itself. 1970, the eighth planet of the solar system trines natal Venus, and Maresca unites with boss Umberto Amaturo. January 1974, Uranus is again in an exceptional position in her natal sky, at 27 degrees in Libra, which is opposite radical Uranus, square to the sun, and square to the moon and Pluto. Her son disappears and will never be found again. As can be noted, there's a sinister isosceles triangle governing the subject's birth chart. Uranus at the center, and the sun on one side and the moon and Pluto on the other. This is the privileged observatory for catching the signs of the destiny of a character so shadowed by connections with the underworld. but to whom a feeling of solidarity is also due for the atrocious fate she encountered at birth. Probably, had she studied, had that Mars in Libra at the descendant made her a lawyer, perhaps she would not be who she is today, but it was not to be. Mars is the first dominant of the chart, because it is angular and because it is the ruler of the ascendant. Experience teaches us that Mars in Libra, if dominant, can be very dangerous, because it is very flammable. It is driven by a strong thirst for justice, understood naturally, according to her own perspective, which, as often happens, can more easily see the speck in the other's eye than the plank in her own. When this position is rising on the ascendant, it is easy to expect violence suffered by the subject. In the case, however, that it is setting on the descendant, there is generally aggressiveness towards others, a warmongering spirit, destructive values. This is our case. Another protagonist of this horoscope is death. It, in our opinion, is especially visible in the stellium in the 11th house, which, as we have had the opportunity to say several times, would be related to mourning, sharing the field, we do not yet know exactly how, with the 8th sector. The latter is quite eloquent. Jupiter trine to the moon, and Pluto is the dispositor of the 8th in the 7th. All this can be read as the death of the husband, or as celebrity coming from the death of the husband, or as economic assets inherited from the husband. Regarding the signs, we must note the opposition of the luminaries between Cancer and Capricorn, between the 4th and the 10th house, a great desire for privacy, domesticity, and tenderness, brutalized by reality, the earth values represented precisely by Capricorn and the 10th house. The deep fracture is managed with an Aryan assertiveness, the ascendant at 20 degrees and 48 minutes, and with Uranian will, Uranus conjunct the ascendant. Pupetta Maresca, due to the salient features of her horoscope and the troubled events of her life, appears above all as a woman who lives in the trenches, who must manage everyday life with a dagger in her mouth, who knows that life for her is first and foremost struggle, passions, tragedies, and these are not over. On June 12, 1982, a few months after the famous declaration, Umberto Amaturo, the second important companion of her life, is arrested, and on July 13th, she also ends up in prison, suspected of the Semerari murder. The criminologists found decapitated. It seems that even the Kabbalah is against her. On July 17, 1955, her husband was killed. On February 13, 1982, she challenged the new Camorra, and on July 13, 1982, she was arrested for the second time in her life. Pupetta Maresca had 2 children with Umberto Amaturo, twins Roberto and Antonella, the latter with a heart condition, also a thorn in the side of this tough woman, guapa, with an ungrateful destiny. Returning to the famous press conference regarding the warning already mentioned, we observe that it was important from the subject's point of view because it also sanctioned, in fact, the alliance between the Maresca's team and that of the Nuova Famiglia, new family, i.e., the meeting with the Giuliano, with Michele Zaza, with the Bardellino, with the Nuvoletta. The political geography of the post-earthquake Camorra changes and expands. The hands on the city become more numerous. It seems that 200,000 Camorra people live in Campania. The crime industry diversifies, fragmenting its interests. The 50,000 people involved in cigarette smuggling after the soaring rise of the dollar and the consequent crisis in tobacco smuggling have diverted their forces to racketeering extended to all sectors of public, commercial, and industrial life in Campania. The bribe, tangente, is even applied to criminal operations, for example, car theft, and this has generated the fratricidal war between rival gangs, a war that produced 236 murders in 1981, greatly exceeded in the last 2 years. Pupetta Maresca is framed within this context, and her outburst at the press club is within this panorama. Someone on that occasion spoke of acting and a spirit of sceneggiata, Neapolitan musical drama. But it seems more logical to suppose that at the root of the subject's behavior in those circumstances was instead fear. Fear and that justice-seeking spirit dictated by the Libra angularity at the descendant. Even in prison, Amatura's woman did not feel safe. On the contrary, there have always been many murders among Camorristi right inside the penitentiaries. There are people sentenced to life imprisonment who are capable of anything for a dose of drugs. In this light, Pupetta Maresca's night, nutata meaning difficult period, does not seem to be over yet, and many shadows hang over her head. According to this logic, the years 1984 and 1985 appear difficult for her, underlined by various important transits, and especially by the transit of Jupiter over the MC and over the natal Sun, Mercury, and Venus. Why fear a Jupiter transit? Because for her it means being in the spotlight, and her spotlight until today has always had the same epilogue. If belonging to the sign of Capricorn will give her longevity, she will have to face, among other things, the most dangerous transit of her life. Uranus over the Sun at the vertex of that famous triangle. But there's still a lot of time until then. Ciro Discepolo from the book Da Costanzo, Anil de Iotti, Edizioni Ricerca 90, Naples, 1992.